Hello friends, it is wonderful to have you with me today. Now this video is going to be slightly history based, and it's a topic that I find incredibly interesting. And that is the origins of sayings. Now, in every culture, in every single language, there are everyday expressions and everyday phrases that originate from somewhere, right? For instance, it's raining cats and dogs. And I've often wondered where these sayings come from. And I decided to do a video on the origins of sayings. But World War I. Now, you will notice that there are a lot of everyday expressions, well, from the English language that originates from World War I. And there were so many more. This is literally just a snippet of some of the sayings that originate from this World War. I decided to include the ones that you would recognize more. So I've actually made this PDF. Well, actually it's a keynote thing. I don't really know. I haven't animated it or anything, but it's just to visually explain to you the sayings, and I added a little picture and stuff like that so you can really immerse yourself into this video. And I'm going to try and make this PDF downloadable. So if you're a teacher, if you're a caregiver, I don't know if you're wanting to download it for yourself or use it as a teaching tool for your students, then that is absolutely fine, and I will try and find a way to allow you to download it for your own personal use. So, the origins of sayings. World War I. And you see in this picture here we have a group of soldiers in the trenches. This one seems to be eating something. This one is looking straight at us, thinking, what the hell? There are a couple of others in the background. You must remember that cameras were very rare back in the early 1900s, and to have your picture taken was quite something. So a lot of these soldiers have never seen a photo camera before, and if you've ever got the chance to watch They Shall Not Grow Old by Peter Jackson, it's a documentary about World War I, and it's been colorized from black and white into color. If you get a chance to watch that documentary, you can really see the confusion about what a camera is. It's quite interesting to see. So, let's move on to our first slide. And the first expression is here today, gone tomorrow. Now, what this means in today's society is that an unreliable something or someone that appears 1 minute and disappears as soon as they have arrived or it has arrived. For example, the sunny weather is so unpredictable these days. The sun is here 1 minute and gone the next. So where does this come from? So you'll know that World War I saw the highest death tolls in any war in history. So that meant that the mortality rate, so the death rate of soldiers was really, really, really high. And it was very, very common for fresh recruits, so straight out of basic training, first day on the front line, to be killed on their first day, which was incredibly sad. So soldiers were alive one day and then killed the next. And that's where the saying comes from. Over here you have groups of men and women saying goodbye to each other. They're leaving on the train, ready to go off to France or wherever these people are going. They're kissing their loved ones goodbye because I don't think they'll ever see them again. Here today, gone tomorrow. The next expression is over the top. Now, what it means today is someone whose behaviour is overly dramatic, flamboyant, excessive, exaggerated, or they put a lot of unnecessary effort into very small tasks. I think we all know someone who's a little bit over the top, right? So for example, Becky is going to be organising the party. I really hope she doesn't go over the top with the decorations. So, where does this come from? So, you'll remember that World War I was fought in trenches, which were holes dug into the ground and then bolstered up with sandbags and dirt and stuff like that. And the act of climbing over the top was the only way you could get into the battlefield. So, originally, it referred to the physical act of launching an attack by climbing over the sandbag parapet in front of the trench, which was like here. Let's do my little thingy here. So it was like here they would put the sandbags on the edge there. Alright, so yes, so it meant going over the top of those. Alright, so thus it became synonymous with setting off on a highly dangerous venture, because once you went over the top of the sandbags, you were in no man's land, which was basically, I guess, you've got the German trench here, English trench here, and you've got this square patch of probably about 100 yards or so of nothing. It's literally, that's where you go to die. You've got machine guns shooting this way, and you've got them shooting this way too. So this was a very, very dangerous patch of land. So that expression, going over the top meant something dangerous. That mostly died out after the war. But but in recent years it was revived. But now it meant to embark on a course of action or to make a remark that is either excessive or unnecessary. So like World War I itself. A lot of historians agree that World War I was one of the most bloodthirsty but unnecessary wars of our time. A lot of historians say that World War I was just a misunderstanding that got out of hand. So thus the expression over the top was born, or reinvented, I would say. Alright, okay. So this next one is really interesting because, to my mind, it's not really an expression. It's, I don't know, it's something you say every day, really. I didn't realise there was a meaning behind this. So this one was really interesting to me. So having a chat or chatting, what it means today is to talk with someone casually or for an extended period of time or just very quickly. You know, when you chat and talk to your friends, right? So for example, I had a good chat with Tom today. We spoke about everything. So where does this expression come from? So you know that in World War I, the conditions in the trench were awful. You hear of rats, lice, trench foot. You know, these men couldn't bathe, they couldn't wash, they had to sleep in the same clothes that were caked in mud. It was just awful. So, the trenches were infested with lice, which the soldiers gave the nickname chats. So, C-H-A-T-S. Alright. I don't know where that word comes from. It must be something to do with an English sort of, I don't know, slang word back in those days. We'll make a note to see where chat comes from. So they named the lice chat. So when the soldiers had time, they would sit around in groups like this and pick off the chats or the lice from their clothing, their hair, from each other, whilst talking amongst themselves, just passing the time. And this became known as chatting. I really love this man up here. He's got a lovely smile. It's a bit degraded, but his smile makes me laugh. So yes, that is having a chat or chatting. I thought that was really interesting. So, going on from lice, have you ever heard of the expression that's lousy or lousy or that's crummy? And what it means today is that something that is really poor, dirty, bad quality, gross, or you don't like it. For example, the service in this restaurant is really lousy, or it's really crummy. So like before, it comes from the presence of lice. So lice can also be known as a louse. I'm sure that's like the plural or the singular version of lice. I think lice is plural and louse is singular. I'm not sure. So you can see where the word louse comes from. Or lousy without the E maybe. So So that was the descriptive adjective lousy, or lousy, which meant lice infested or crummy. I'm guessing crummy comes from like crumbly dirt on their uniform or something like that. That's maybe the crummy. Or it's directly related to the lice, I'm not really sure. But crummy meant dirty or unpleasant. Like I said before, the soldiers couldn't bathe, they couldn't wash, they couldn't change their clothes or brush their teeth. So they referred to themselves as crummy. And this condition actually worsened by the presence of lice, which of course lice are very, very, very unsanitary little creatures, and they actually cause a lot of health problems, such as epidemic typhus, epidemic relapsing fever, and trench fever. So it was really important to get those lice off you as soon as possible and try and keep your uniform clean as possible and your hair and your skin. Just get those lice off, otherwise you'll be going down with trench fever. So that's lousy or that's crummy. Now here's one that's very interesting and one that I had no idea originated from World War One, and that is the word cooties. Now I think cooties is actually cooties. If you're American, the T becomes a D. I think cooties is a more American phrase. I don't remember using this as a kid. We used to say, instead of like, you've got cooties, we used to say, you've got germs. So cooties isn't an expression that I've used a lot as a kid, but I know it's very, very, very popular all around the world, and you hear it all the time in movies and kids films and stuff like that. So what it means today is an imaginary germ which a socially undesirable person or a person of the opposite sex is said to be infected. So it's just a really mean bullying word, I think. So for example, ew, stay away from Martha, she's got cooties. So again with the lice, they had a lot of names for lice. It was actually a word that the British troops first used, and it originated from the Malayan word for lice, which was kutu. Kutu. So when the British military first encountered the Far East and heard this word kutu, they adapted it, spelling it according to how it sounded. Now, for us Brits, we are very... our accent is very strange sometimes, especially when you get sort of further south. We elongate words, we morph words into things that are just so illegible and unrecognizable. So, and we're notorious also for not learning languages, because English is spoken all around the world, right? We are incredibly lazy and we don't learn languages. So our language ear is not very trained, and we tend to shorten or bastardize the root word, and we'll see another example of this later on. But you can see that how does kutu become cooties? I can kind of see cooties, cooties. that's really interesting. Cooties. So, have you heard of the expression basket case, right? It's one that I was introduced to because of the band Green Day. I think they had a song called Basket Case, and I always wondered what that meant. Now as an adult I know, but when I was a teenager I thought it was I don't know, a very special sort of a basket you carry things around in. But what it means today is that a person or thing regarded as useless or unable to cope. I think also basket case can mean somebody who's a little bit unhinged, a little bit mad, very unkind, but again, bullying sort of a word for someone. So for example, he's strange, that one, a real basket case. So the true meaning of basket case is actually quite sad. It tends to be fairly light-hearted when used today. For instance, somebody who makes stupid mistakes or somebody who crumbles under pressure. But the original basket case is a gruesome reminder of just how bloody World War I became. In its original context, a basket case was a soldier who had been so badly injured that they had to be carried from the battlefield in a barrow or a basket. Usually it meant that they had lost all of their 4 limbs, so they couldn't walk or help themselves to rescue or medical attention. So you see here we have some surgeons working on a poor guy here. You can't really see what's happening, but there were a lot of really serious injuries in World War I. And the only way you ever got a chance to go home was if you were maimed or injured beyond repair, or being carried off in a basket. So that is basket case, an interesting one. So I don't know whether or not you have heard of the word blighty. I know my English friends definitely would have, because blighty is the old-fashioned word for Great Britain, mostly used among the older generations. It's just, good old Blighty. For example, I was raised in good old Blighty. So where does this word Blighty come from? So again, like I said, the English are notorious for not knowing or not having a very good ear for languages. So the word originated from bilati or filiati. So that's B-I-L-A with a thing over the top, Y-A-T and then I, or V-I-L-A-Y-A-T-I. Okay. And that's an Urdu word which means foreign. So again, we have heard bilyatu or bilyati and thought, kind of sounds like blighty. If that's what the Urdu people are calling us, that's what we're going to say. And this actually first emerged among British troops serving in India in the late 19th century. But it didn't really catch on until the First World War, so it was around before the First World War, but it really caught on once the war began. A blighty wound, or a blighty one, was an injury severe enough to warrant being sent home. So like I said before, the only way you were ever going to get home was to be injured. And of course, people tried to hurt themselves on purpose or self-injure themselves so they could go home. But this was punishable by death. But there are no known cases of anybody being executed under the rules. So I think really what happened is that they couldn't afford to shoot their own men for, I guess, for a better word, mutiny, because the body count for World War I was so high, they just needed soldiers all the time. So I think it was more of a warning than an actual carried out punishment. And I think a lot of the soldiers knew that. So they would try their best to injure themselves to go home, but I think 9 times out of 10 they would be forced to stay and fight anyway. Next, you may have heard of this word. It's Dingbat. Dingbat. Again, it is I guess a bullying word for someone who is stupid, silly, or moronic. Like, I guess, idiot. But it's more of a, I guess, nicer word. You can say it nicely, like, oh, you're such a dingbat. Or, for example, Sally is such a dingbat. I asked her to get me yogurt, but she got me ice cream instead. So where does this word dingbat come from? So in England, we have a word thingamy. So thingamy, which basically means somebody you cannot remember the life of you, what their name is. So like, oh, you know thingamy down the road? Or thingamajig is when you can't remember the name of an object. So for instance, oh, can you just grab me the thingamajig? So it's kind of like that kind of word. Again, we have whatchamacallit, which is whatchamacallit. So it's like, oh, whatchamacallit, that thing that we went to see the other day, whatchamacallit, you know. So, again, dingbat can be used for somebody who is foolish, clumsy. And it first came to the World War I. I don't really know how it came there. I guess it was somebody who, I don't know, maybe the root words is dingbat. So ding could be a term for being clumsy, and bat. We actually use another term. It's called an old bat, which is not a nice way of describing an older person, mostly women. So you can say she's an old bat. That's a not nice word. So maybe it's a root word from there, but I'm not too sure. Anyway, it was actually taken up by Australian and New Zealand troops, and they used the phrase to have the dingbats or to be dingbats, which meant shell-shocked, nervous, or mad. So that's a very interesting one, and probably one I need to do a little bit more research on about the root words of ding and bat. So that's dingbat. This one is the word plonk. Plonk. And again, this is very common in British. everyday sayings, again, mostly with the older generations. But what it means is, well, it's basically a slang word for a bottle of wine. So, for instance, that's a fine bottle of Plonk you've got there. Now, where does this come from? Now, again, the English show themselves up whenever they hear foreign languages, and this root word is from vin blanc. Vin blanc, which is white wine in French. And of course, as English, we cannot for the life of us pronounce other people's languages. So, vin blanc. They dropped the vin and just had blanc and added plonk. Added a P instead of the B. So when the British were out in France, obviously when they had downtime, they would go to the pubs or the, have alcohol. And obviously there was wine there. And the French would be like, oh, vin blanc, vin blanc. And they'll be like, what? Plonk. Yeah, I'll have some plonk. So plonk is actually white wine, but now it is just wine. So do you know also the word plonker? So plonker. If you've watched the TV show Only Fools and Horses, you have Del Boy saying to Rodney, "Don't be such a plonker, Rodney." And this is the root word from plonk. And basically, plonker was somebody who was drunk all the time, which makes sense because you're always drinking wine, so you become a plonker. And I actually use a lot. I use plonker a lot in my everyday speech. It's kind of a nice criticism of someone. Like, you can use it endearingly. I think the show Only Fools and Horses made it quite sweet, plonker. So it's not too bad of an insult. So that's plonk. Now this one you may all be familiar with, and that's the word sniper. The famous sniper, somebody who can shoot a very small object from very, very far away. Someone who is very good at shooting a rifle. So, you'll know, a sniper is someone who shoots from a hiding place, especially accurately and at a long range. So, for example, unfortunately, madam, your husband was shot and killed by a sniper in battle. So where does the word sniper come from? Because prior to the First World War, they weren't known as snipers. They were known as sharp shooters. Sharp shooters. But when the war broke out, the Germans fielded or employed thousands of highly trained riflemen, and they were usually equipped with telescopic, you see here, telescopic rifles. And the British referred to them as snipers, which actually originated back to the army in India in the late 18th century, when the officers would go bird hunting in the hills and shoot the tiny snipe bird. This is my terrible, what was that? I'm not even going to attempt to draw it. Anyway, this bird was very tiny, and it was known as the snipe bird. targets to hit. Not only was it so small, it was so far away and it was moving all the time. So it's really hard to hit. And from 1914 onwards, the word was widely adopted by the British press and has since become universal. So, sniper, you were once a rifleman or a sharpshooter, but then you became a sniper. So, that brings us to the end of Origins of Sayings, World War One, sorry. There are quite a few for World War II, which I'm working on at the moment. But if you have any suggestions of other sayings that you are interested in, for instance, it's raining cats and dogs, there are so many, like apple of my eye, I don't know. Please let me know down in the comments box and I'll be sure to include them in my next Origin of Sayings words. And again, also, if you speak a language other than English, I would be really fascinated to know what sayings you have in your language and in your culture. I think it's really interesting to see the difference between cultures, and I think especially it's very prominent in the way we say things, in our everyday expressions and how we express ourselves. So please let me know, that would be really interesting. So thank you so much for listening. I hope you have found this to be relaxing as well as informative. And from all of us here, take care and I will see you soon.